and welcome back to Cheap Tuesdays, where we look at some budget pedals and see how they really go. Now, today we are looking at a kind of pedal I've had for a little while, a couple of months now, the Valeton DS-10. So I have the DS-10 here, you can see it in my hands. It is based on its orange color and, you know, its overall look. You might be able to guess what it's based on, and that is the very famous Boss DS-1 Distortion. Now, when you look at these, you might think they're actually fairly big pedals, fairly normal sized pedals. And it wasn't until I opened it up, I'm like, oh, they've just made everything miniature. For comparison, here is my modded DS-1 Distortion, and here's the Valeton. We might be able to do a bit of a close-up of the comparison on the other camera. You can see it is significantly smaller, but the Valeton is actually really hefty on a build quality level. Unlike a lot of these Chinese pedals, this is kind of a solid metal thing. If you compare to, say, the Behringers, which are famous for doing Boss clones as well, and they're crappy plastic that you can break easily. This is weighty. I'd even go to say it's probably a similar weight to the Boss Distortion, but a lot smaller. Now you're thinking, well, the Boss DS-1 is a cheap pedal anyway. Why would I buy a mini clone of one of the cheapest kind of famous pedals there is? That's because this adds a few cool features. Now, these are mods that you could probably do yourself if you had the time and the skill, but in order to pay for these mods from the source, which would be, I'm guessing Keeley is what these are based on, it would cost you a bit over $100. So it's a little bit of a price difference. I think this is about $60, $50. I'm not sure what the going price is now. They're a bit hard to always find. They're not as available as some of the other Chinese pedals, but it's significantly cheaper. It's still cheaper than a stock DS-1. Now, supposedly this uses the same specs as the Japanese early 80s black DS-1s. Now the DS-1s changed over time as far as which op amps they use. A few little things in the circuit that many argue don't make a difference. Others argue they make a huge difference. For me personally, I've played some of the earlier Japanese ones and I think they sound better than the stock ones, especially the stock ones in the early to mid 2000s. I'm not exactly sure. I did have another video comparing this to the Rat and I think another type of the Dod drive, where I go into information about each of those kind of circuits a bit more. So go have a look at that if you want to learn a bit more about the DS-1 circuit. And today we're not really going to go into that. We're going to be more talking about this particular pedal. So it has got 3 modes. We've got Ultra, Normal and Tube. Once we set it up, I'll go into them more detail, but basically you've got the stock 80s DS-1 sound and then 2 modified DS-1s based on, I believe, the Ultra Keeley mod, which is the Seeing Eye mod, SEM mod, and the Ultra mod, which is basically 2 clipping options and a few other things. So we're going to go plug it in. We're playing it through the AC50. Now, originally I was playing this through my stereo tone and I'm like, well, this is where it stands. This is where DS-1 sound great through my stereo tone, which is general consensus. A lot of people don't like the Boss Distortion instead of in front of a Marshall style circuit. Stereo tone is a pretty Marshall style clean channel. A little bit different, but pretty Marshally. And to be fair, the AC50 does have Marshall qualities too, but it's a lot flatter, a lot more of that kind of voxy mid-range that you expect from an AC30 or AC15, but just a bit more solid on the low end. Go check out my very extensive long AC50 video. That was probably my first sponsored video, and it's really in-depth video there. But basically, normally you wouldn't put a DS-1 in those circuits, but I was playing around with it yesterday and I thought it sounded great, so that's what we're going to plug it into. So without further ado, we're going to go into it. I'm going to start off with humbuckers and then we'll use single coils as well. This kind of distortion I do prefer with humbuckers, and I do kind of like it when there's a little bit of gain from the amp, but like I said, we're going to run the Vox clean. We may use this as a booster later on another amp. We'll see how we go. But at this stage, it's going to be fairly clean amp, humbuckers, and then single coils, and have a look through the modes. Okay, so I have the J&D custom, whatever you want to call it. It's a clone of an LP custom. We all kind of know what it's meant to be. It is down in drop D flat like it usually is for the heaviest stuff, and we've got a custom 5 Seymour Duncan in the bridge. So that kind of gives you an idea what this bass tone is. I've set up both channels on the AC50. We'll go through the clean tone in a sec. So I think what we'll do first is just get a vibe for the pedal. Now, the most distortion sounding DS-1 thing is, of course, gain on full, and then volume and tone to suit. Generally, I like a tone around 12 o'clock. The tone control is based on the similar tone control to the Big Muff. And so if you go down, it gets really dark. If you go up, it cuts bass and it gets too bright. So I really do think 12 o'clock is generally where you want to keep it. And maybe adjust a little bit on each mode and your amp on what you're going for. But most of the good sounds around the 12 o'clock. And with each different mode, you have a different kind of volume because the clipping is a bit different. So you can then adjust the volume to suit. So the ultra mode is where we'll start. It's got the least gain. Then we have the tube mode, which has got a little less gain than the stock mode and then stock mode. So let's just listen to what the amp sounds like clean as a reference and go through each of the modes. And I'll try and adjust the volume to make sure the modes are similar in volume. And then we'll have a look at some of the controls, maybe on the stock mode and the ultra mode. To me, the tube mode is in the middle, so I think certain things apply to both of them. And then we'll have a look at some other things. So let's get the clean tone first. Basically got the idea of what this is like. If you've never used a Boss Distortion before, it's slightly scooped in the mids with a certain high mid characteristic going on as well. It's a fairly upfront, full-on distortion, cuts through quite well, doesn't really get mushy, doesn't sag much, not that amp-like, if that's kind of your thing, but it has some qualities to it that kind of make it better than an amp in some ways. It's not necessarily tight, but it's got this kind of aggressive edge to it that is really the sound of distortion pedals. So let's go through the modes, as I said. So maybe I'll just play that kind of grungy style riff and then a little bit of a lead thing. So we'll go through the mode with the grungy style riff and then a little bit of a lead thing. More volume to compensate. And stock mode with even more volume to compensate. And now let's do some lead. Back to tube mode. And ultra mode. Now, to me, tube mode and ultra mode just sound superior. It's not just the volume, it's the bass response, it's kind of the clarity. It's not as harsh, it's not as fizzy. It's got a lot more punch to it than the stock mode, and this is to be expected. This is why people love modding DS-1s. So this distortion here, which we could do a comparison, but this is going to sound nothing like any of them because this is heavily modded. I've completely changed the gain structure and completely changed the EQ. And it also isn't working that well because I'm guessing my soldering has kind of ruined the circuit board a little bit. But people love modding DS-1s, including me. My first pedal I ever bought with my own money was a Brian Wampler modified DS-1 before I bought his own pedal, the Pinnacle 2, now known as the Pinnacle. Yeah, I used his great vintage and modern modded DS-1, and that was my main pedal when I was a teenager, so almost 15 years ago. And it was a great. So I grew up loving the DS-1 sounds, except really the stock sound. I love the modded sounds. Also, we are running flat out gain. Now the thing is, the stock DS-1 at full gain is a bit too gainy, a bit too fizzy. So let's go. I think it's probably best to stay in the ultra mode for now. The other thing is the stock mode being gainier is noisier. Now it isn't the quietest pedal, especially in the environment I am in. I'm not going to argue that it's going to be quiet. Now on stage, when you're playing with the band, you're standing further away from all your gear. You're not using as much gain, like volume wise, as I am going into a load and stuff. You're probably going to have less noise problems, but like most of these kind of high gain distortion pedals, maybe if noise is a problem, you need a gate. Now I've got a video on the Behringer gate. If you need a cheap gate, it's a pretty okay usable gate for this kind of application. So let's go through the EQ controls. I'm going to stay on ultra mode. We will go to stock mode just to show how the tone is a little different in stock mode as well. Now I could use stock mode and go, well, this is how close it is to the original DS-1, but I think the whole point of buying this pedal is not necessarily for that sound, it is for the more modded sound. So I think it is better using in ultra mode because that's probably where you're going to stay. So again, we'll keep the gain how it is, and we're going to go through the tone control, and then I think we'll go through the gain range and then go through the tone control again, because the distortion, like a lot of these pedals, sorry for the noise, the distortion, like a lot of these pedals, does change the EQ structure a little bit as you get more saturated. It does change what kind of EQ you might want to use. I find the same with the Big Muff, same with the Rat. So 12 o'clock hour on, let's go to it. Without that high end, it is just really dark. I mean, that might be something what you want to use for maybe an effect, but it's pretty unusable when you take that tone down, and you'll see what happens to the low end as we go up. So you can really hear what happens there. The low end kind of shelves out and you've got this really high mid honk kind of come in. And that, to me, is that nasal character that a lot of Boss pedals have. Nearly all the Boss gain pedals I have got that frequency. I don't know why they put that into their EQs. It's a Boss thing. My Hyper Metal does it. I'm pretty sure the Metal Zone does it. I mean, it does depend on where you have the parametric EQ, but the Metal Zone is definitely capable of it. It's a certain, the HM2 is the same, a certain nasal Boss frequency that Boss like. Don't know why. So yeah, like, as you can hear, like literally around between here and here is where I like to keep the tone, unless you're doing something very different. So let's pull the gain down. I think what we'll do, maybe we'll just go back, let's go through the gain range actually. So full, it's high gain. Once we're below that, there's a little less subtlety between the gain settings. So on the Ultra mode, it does kind of clean up pretty well as the gain comes down. You can actually get a little bit more feel and a little bit more of those dynamics in there. It's not just distorted all the time. Now we'll switch to the stock mode and you'll be able to hear how you don't get that as much in the stock mode. And on the tube mode, so really the Ultra mode is a lot more kind of dynamic. It's a lot more natural. The stock mode, you've got that fizz on top no matter what you're kind of doing. Now with single coils, of course, you've got even less gain. And we'll go through single coils in a minute, but it's definitely there, that kind of fizz, which a lot of people don't like from the DS-1. And most of the kind of mods solve those issues, kind of change the EQ bit while keeping the general tone of that in-your-face, hard-edged distortion. So maybe we'll just have a look at using the toe control with the gain down a little bit. Let's go into the Ultra mode again. Actually, let's stay in the tube mode, because the EQ in the tube mode's a little bit in between. You don't have as much low end. So this is kind of your 12 o'clock tube mode. Let's just bring it up, maybe 12 o'clock in the distortion. Now the darkness in this mode I think works a little bit better than in Ultra mode because you don't have as much low end getting in the way. But the treble kind of gets bad quicker. Unless that's the sound you kind of want. It's a very particular sound. I mean, it could be cool for an intro. I mean, you could start a song, you know. And then the next section you record is basically this. Yeah, you kind of get the idea. You can use an effect. But yeah, that's kind of the main controls, the main sounds you get from the Valeton. Again, I think it's good for that hard edge distortion, but not necessarily for your more natural sounds. Now, while we've still got this, I want to crank up the Brilliant channel, because a lot of people have famously used the DS-1 as a booster into, I guess, not necessarily low gain, but not super high gain cascaded preamps. So, you know, with your classic Marshall JCM 800 or something with a distortion in front of it is a sound. I think Satriani used a distortion, Steve Vai used a DS-1 distortion. I'm sure there's more. I'm not a huge fan of that style of music. Nothing against those guys. They're much better players than me, but I don't really listen to it, so I can't really talk much on their tone, but plenty of people have used the DS-1. Of course, the big one is Kurt Cobain, but usually I think it was fairly clean in that instance. But let's crank this up before we go to single coils. I'm going to turn off the normal channel. We're going to get a little bit more of what power tube distortion in your more Marshall territory and use it as a little bit of a booster and see what it does there. Okay, so this is the cranked up AC50. For more tones like this, go check out the AC50 video. Let's undrop that. A little bit more here. Let's So maybe we will go to stock mode. I think stock mode actually should work here. So pedal off. Let's try tube mode, baby. So in that instance, using it as a booster, you do of course get a lot more of the natural amp sound. It isn't imparting as much tone. It is tightening up a little bit. It is giving a bit more of a modern mid-scooped kind of flavor, but it is kind of enhancing the tone. It actually works quite well. I'm quite surprised with that tone. I actually really like what it was doing there, and you don't get as much as that front-on harshness that you get from using into a clean amp. So let's go to actually some quite low gain single coils, because the cool thing about these hard clipping distortions, which you don't necessarily get from an amp, is they kind of take single coils and they don't really give a shit that it is low output. They still rock, basically. So, well, I'm just going to turn that down. So we're going to use the clean sound again and play the telly. So we have my Parenti T-Type. I've kind of stopped using this for a while. I still want to change the pickups out that I've had sitting on the shelf for about 2 years. Anyway, but very, very vintage sounding. We've got super low output tele pickups in here, very different to the previous guitar. So how does a distortion like this go with that? So let's get the clean tone. We're pretty much set exactly the same, maybe with a little bit more volume as we were, to kind of get that kind of just before it starts to break up in the Vox. But yeah, cool kind of telly tone. So let's go for our favorite previous tone, which was distortion on full, the other thing's 12 o'clock ultra mode. Wrong fucking key. Of course, the single coils are pretty noisy. Go to tube mode and kind of get a bit more of a brash kind of thing. That is a tone that I wouldn't get out of a normal DS-1. Let's go to stock mode and show you really what stock mode would be doing. So if we go the volume back up, just a bit too fizzy, a bit too nasal, a bit too scratchy or something. And tube ultra mode. So yeah, a much improvement over the stock sound. I reckon those two modes, especially with single coils, and especially with single coils like this that have that kind of upper mid range going on. Lastly, I want to switch the neck pickup, go for your kind of smooth leads. Because I think that's something that you can actually get out of DS-1. I might add some reverb delay post when I'm editing this video, so that might be what's coming on this one. Maybe I'll hit some right notes. the Valeton DS-10. My 2 cents on it is go get it. Go get it. I mean, unless you hate hard edge distortion completely, then maybe get their Blues Driver clone. Like, if you are into any hard edge distortion, if you want something to boost your amp, that kind of thing, or just want to try out a new flavor and you don't have a Boss distortion style distortion, great, get it. It is fairly cheap. Seems to be built like a tank. Now, I don't know about taking on the road, but as far as cheap pedal goes, it is probably one of the heftiest, best built pedals I own. And in all kind of seriousness, it sounds good to me. It's personal preference, of course, but it sounds good. It does exactly what I expect when I buy something like this. And the smoothness of the controls for a cheap pedal are pretty good. I've had a lot of cheap pedals and see the taper's all out. Like, it sounds good, but you have like, you know, a millimeter between good and awful on the tone control. And this is fairly smooth in the travel. It also looks pretty cool. Might be a little bit too small for some of you, but I think it's great. So thanks for watching. Thanks for watching another Cheap Tuesdays. Again, I always say I'm hoping that more come out. You know, it gets hard when I'm not buying pedals all the time. But yeah, check out the other Cheap Tuesdays videos. Check out Free Plugin Friday. And if you like the sound through the Vox, go check out the Vox video. It's a long one. It took me a while to edit and get through it all, but it has basically most of the sounds I can get out of the Vox. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.